I think, yeah. Let me go get it. Sorry.
And so all the other judges were all there.
Oh, I'm sure. And there's also, yeah.
Oh, sweet. Oh, awesome. Perfect.
You see that, the little, you see the little street, like, take it.
Oh, my goodness, look at that.
That's cute.
So is this how the school is?
Or able to.
Yeah, and he's in all of the years. And then there's something.
Yeah, she signed up for an MFA, she's over to go. Put in her name and all this, and then turns it MFA. Oh, the EFA. All ready to go.
I don't know.
students and teachers and schools who take part every year, and for us to have an opportunity to play a small role in celebrating and supporting your creative endeavors. So the main thing that we're here for today is to congratulate these year's award winners. But on behalf of everyone at the museum and also the Justice Group, I also want to thank the award winners. So congratulating us, but I also want to thank you. At least I want to thank you. Is that it's been really incredibly moving for us this year to get a glimpse into the lives we've been living as teens and young adults during this pandemic. We've been struck by how brave you are and have been in sharing your work with us and with the wider world during such a confoundingly difficult time in all of our lives. Your voices and your creativity and your talent have really been inspiring for us to behold. So I thank you for that. And on behalf of that whole group, I urge you to keep making art and keep writing, because the world really needs to hear it. All right. With that said, you hope you have a program here so you can follow along and see what's going to be happening. The only change that I'm aware of is that the last Leventhal is not here to do the reading, and we're uncertain whether two of the other groups are here, but we'll find out when we get there. But the first thing up is keynote address, and so it's a pleasure for me to introduce today's keynote speaker. She is a bright star in Vermont's creative constellation. Shanta Lee Gander is a multidisciplinary artist whose work manifests primarily poetry and prose and photography. She's the author of Ghetto Claustrophobia, Dreaming of Mama While Trying to Speak Woman in Woke Tongues, and the forthcoming collection, Black Metamorphoses. Shanta Lee's work has appeared in Prism, Iterant Literary Magazine, Powell, Poetry, Lavity, Dame Magazine, Crisis Magazine, and Magazine. In 2020, she received the Vermont Arts Council's Arthur Williams Award for Meritorious Service to the Arts. We here at Southern Vermont get to read the reports of Shanta's service to the arts on a regular basis, and she lives and works right here. So won't you please welcome Shanta Lee Gander.
What an honor. Welcome everyone, and I want to borrow from Annie's remarks and thank you all the women for sharing their work with all of us. My deep gratitude to the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center for this opportunity to address you all. I am honored to share these remarks, especially in the company of your esteemed work. I approach these remarks in the tradition of epistolary as an open but personal letter, not much different than Milton's letters to a young poet, which started when a poet wrote to Milton asking for something of his work. His letters to the young poet ranged from sound advice like singing from the pain of one's solitude to needing to have patience with the unresolved trials within all of us. For this, I also speak out of the same canon that the great composer Tchaikovsky spoke from when he wanted to console his nephew through the love patch. So there is a lot of love with these words, something we don't really say publicly to each other. I hope we're starting. However, let's take the hierarchy of it. I'm speaking to you within a wide, broad, and ever-growing community from artist to artists, from me to you. This is what senior work has inspired. The creative range from humor to direct gaze through camera lens or pen upon paper. And it wasn't just through camera lens or any of those mediums, but it was the way that you took your take on things and connected with the viewer. And you did it across so many mediums that range from the graphic novel to painting, making, the many vehicles in ways that truly makes the viewer take notice. and all of this work has been printed upon me. So please consider this me living known to you that you may carry in your endeavors and hopefully as you continue to create. As the world unmakes, you continue to make and create. Right now, it feels like the world is unmaking itself. Pandemic, several wars, racism, so many other things. Of course, that is the understatement of the year, right? So many things happening. Please know that the world of history is long and is old. There have been many iterations of the unmaking. And what is key to know about unmaking is that it coexists with the creating, the draining, the doing, which also looks like contemplation, the standing still. This time more than ever is the time to ask yourself, how will your art witness and engage with this now? This moment of now reminds me of what poet and theater director and playwright Bertolt Brecht, his famous quote that I'm sure most of us have heard, and in dark times will also be saying. Yes, there will also be saying about the dark times. However, I'm going to adjust it to say that the saying will be about what you choose. It needs to be about based on what we're saying. And we've done this already based on what I see in this room and across the other galleries, across the beautiful range of ways that each of us showed us your interpretations of self and the world through your eyes. Whatever feels like the dark time can also be something else in the hands of your creating, is my main point. I'm issuing you a dare to take this moment in our world to engage in a radical reimagining through your creating. Also, very important, be good citizens, be conscious community members, be conscious of your lineage. This sounds easy on the surface and may sound like a statement to which someone would say, well, of course, right? However, I mean this on a deeper level. You'll discover that the word community is easy to use without real thought or connection about what it really implies. Like many communities, that word too has become part of a buzz. It isn't just about sharing the same geographic space any more than it is about having commonality with others. You're now tethered to other creatives, not just within your schools, but across the state, across the region, around the world. You're also connected to all the ones who came before you. Some that we would call ancestors or our family, and family, by the way, is not just dictated by blood. I speak of lineage. This lineage, you may not really know the full scope, especially as it relates to the endless depths of creative making, but it knows you. It has found you through your pottery, your jewelry making, your canvas, your textiles, and so many other expressions. It called, you answered. This happened to me when I finally dedicated time to read about this metamorphosis cover to cover, and I instantly felt like I needed to answer a poem line that was over 2,000 years old, which opened to my second poetry collection, Background Hypothesis. My main point here is continue to be conscious and at least notice the ways that you're going towards that goal. Also, given this, be aware of the space that you're sharing with others. I grew up with my mother telling me that I was always being seen and watched. Now, while this has some interesting implications, I'm sure you can imagine, Montgomery Street being in the bushes or even Washington. The other piece of the advice as I reflect on it is about being conscious about what you're sharing in the world as you're eating. Also notice the space that you ensure that you're making for others. If you get to walk through a door, hold it open for a moment. And in some cases, you have to break it when you let someone in. Do that. That is your duty. This brings me to my next point. Feed your relationships, especially as with other creatives. But feed your personal relationships. And for this, I'm going to pull it. Now, let's suspend any cultural analysis. We know there are lots of things problematic. The Godfather, but the opening scene is brilliant of the first Godfather, played by Marlon Brando. Someone's asking a favor of him, and he says,
Now, I'm not gonna do the imitation. I'm just gonna just the fact. We've known each other for many years, but this is the first time we've come to meet for counsel or help. I can't remember the last time you invited me to your house for a cup of coffee, even though my wife was the godmother to your child. Bottom line, your relationships are key. Not just when you need or want something, not just roll up when you want to ask someone for something. This is very important, but feeding them, growing them. I can't tell you how many times a conversation or helping in good fellowship has fed my work, shifted or added to the depth of my thinking, and it was just good for my overall spirit. This analogy of food makes me think of the adage of the starving artist, and while this speaks to the financial piece of the artist making a living, I've always questioned why starving, especially when we're surrounded by such a wealth of really good company. The artist is not solitary. Though when crafting a home in your head, going to your sewing machine, or whatever kind of vehicle you're using for your making, it may feel like you're alone, but in fact, you are not. You stop being alone when you're making the moment you decided to answer the call. Don't forget this. Also, by that I mean it's easy to compare yourself to anyone else within your age you're giving up. It's easy to look at someone or something and say, that is where I will be. I want to do that. I'm not doing that then. There's nothing wrong with setting goals. However, I want to also encourage that building and nurturing your intimate relationships are part of that goal. Think about all the ways you are engaging in those intimate moments, even when deadlines are staring at you. Even when all you want to do is stay willing to create through this challenge all the time. I want to share with you that the investment in human relationship is part of the continuum of creating. As you feed your relationships, is as tending to a good garden. You are feeding yourselves. Now, funny enough, I know nothing about gardening. My advice is scatter seeds and let the rain come. That's not right. But the analogy fits. The food you grow nurtures you. The relationships you invest in feed and nurture you and whatever you're going to create. And also in those relationships, make sure to journey outside your echo chamber. Ensure that your relationships expand just beyond people who also share your interests. Make sure it's beyond the people, places, and things that reflect back who you are. Engage with the challenge. My next point, everyone will not like your work. Everyone will not appreciate it. Rejection is a dance. You must dance. And all the more reason to invest in your networks and your support systems. Would it surprise you if I told you that culminated was partially criticized because Impressionism was new to many eyes who had not seen it. It took some time for institutions and mainstream to accept it. Would you also be surprised to know that sort of persons, their eyes were watching God, was in danger of going out of France. They received negative criticism, similar to the way that Toni Morrison received negative criticism for focusing her work on the Black experience. It actually took a creative community to push for her to get recognized for her one of her main works for the Blue Sky. I can tell you that though I have 2 books housed with publishers, co-editing an anthology, have an exhibition currently at the Floating Museum of Art, I've faced many rejections. I still do. I received notes with things like, we thought your work was X, we didn't understand it because it was Y. This in fact actually happened to my second poetry collection that is due out next year. I submitted it to about 60 places, it picked up a few prizes, it found a home. But even after it received a home, I got rejection that said, well, it's like I make it. And you gotta sit with that. You won't be everyone's cup of tea. And as a tea drinker, that's shocking to me, but hey, the world is like that, right? And there's some people who don't even like kale, just like you're not going to be everyone's peach. There's some people who can't stand peaches. Someone look at your work and offer unsolicited feedback. This one is my favorite. Someone will ask you to explain yourself, but by the way, you can feel free to do a childish Gambino, aka Rose Glover did. He was asked about the song and music video, This Is America. He was asked to explain it. He let a good helpful promise go and said, nah. It is key to know that it is key to know that your work won't immediately be gotten or understood by everyone. There will be a mix of those who do not get you and those who get you and for whom you won't have to explain. It's okay to continue to carve your own path, and you already have had a taste of that with all the work that you put out. Actually, I encourage you to create work that won't be everyone's cup of tea, because you will be showing us what we've not experienced before. And it is quite tantalizing to go with the flow. There are lots of rewards for that, but also there are deeper rewards for not doing such a thing. You all have already taken the first step. Continue to do that, and it shall be received as it will. This involves you holding to your own vision. You have to be your best champion, and I cannot stress that enough. And here are my last points. There's so many more I can make. I'll leave you with these. Go to the tough places, go to the uncomfortable, use it as literature and therapy. Now, I know that's hard because all of us have been pushed to tough points in ways that we've not expected. But beyond this now, beyond the past couple of years, you're going to have to keep doing that. You're going to have to keep learning that. Go outside of your medium. Venture into what you've not done instead of staying with what you always do so well. For myself, this included my tours of filmmaking for my exhibition. Never made a damn film before, but this was my opportunity. I did it. And you know that cliche, play your strengths? Well, if you're always doing that, how do you ever get a chance to explore not only the unknown, but unknown parts of yourself? And how do you ever get to explore the limits of your creativity or go beyond that and break it? Meet and engage with people, places, and things that challenge you, that makes it totally outside of what feels like your core beliefs. You may even see art that you do not agree with. This is how we grow. And as curious as you are about the world, from what I've gathered, from what I've seen, be just as curious and engage with yourself. There's so much that you will continue to explore and learn about through your lifetimes. Don't stop being a student. Personally, I'm always a student. And the more I learn, the more I know that I just will know. Stay in that. And with this, I want to also encourage, take care of yourself. I don't mean that in the whole buzz, self-care, yoga retreat, right about now, that sounds awesome. I mean this in the way that whenever possible, take yourself back. You'll discover actually that when you start taking yourself back, or are like pulling it close to do what you need to do with it before you share it, not everybody's going to show up to support that. Do it. I'm here to tell you, do it. Notice when you're drawn, what you're drawn to, what you're not drawn to. Take stock of when you need to hit pause, when it feels like everything is a go, go, go. You can be in charge of how and when you engage with your art. And if there's an aspect that's not quite being you or filling your cup, explore this, sit with it, think upon it. Tap into your community and check in with yourself. You are also within that community. You're going to be pulled in different directions. You will have people tell you what you should be doing and what direction and how you should go. The world is going to try to tell you who and what you and your work should be. And also, in many cases, the work may say, or the world may say, hey, I think this is an extension of something about you that you didn't intend to show or illustrate. That's okay too. That's okay. Part of keeping yourself back, keeping yourself nurtured for you and your creativity, and choosing the very things you want to listen and engage with for your own self-care. I've had people ask me if my work is healing because of my life experiences. My answer to this is always that my words, my photography, and whatever else I'm going to engage with will ever create do not have that responsibility. I don't subscribe to that personally. My work has its own rights. With that, I want you to go forward and end the words of an artist that I deeply admire, someone whom I continue getting to know for a broad range of work, and also a treasure to our state. Kaylin Sullivan's Countries, fellow artists. Through your art, I hope you evoke, invoke, and provoke, and find out what those things will be specifically for your creative practice, whatever that may be. Making food, for example, is creative practice. Getting dressed is a creative practice. If you wish that to be, just the act of living life is creative. And as I close, I want to leave you with two personal vignettes. They're examples of me taking myself back and also defining things for myself. I'm going to paraphrase, but several months ago, I was, maybe last year, I was interviewed. There were two questions. One of them was about how did I feel about being a minority or minority artist in Vermont? And I said, I'm no one's minority. There's nothing minor about me. Vermont. It always, I've worked in public health. There's always been a weird place for minority. It's not about me. So it's okay to redefine that for yourself, even though the world will press and press and press and tell you that we try to find who you are. Don't let it. Also, I was asked a question about the hand I was dealt, you know, that basically you're sitting in a card game and it's a game and you're dealt cards and you're playing the cards you dealt. I burned my hand. I'm not kidding. So even though I did I'm very big on the whole idea of that analogy for certain things. For me, that doesn't work. The whole point is define these things for yourself. Even if you choose to go to art school, whatever you're going to do, own that for yourself. And with that, and creativity, I want to thank you for sharing with all of us.
Thank you, Shanta Lee. All right. For the next part of our program, we have arranged for originally 5 and 4, and we're about to find out possibly 2 of our gold key writing winners to come up and read for you. So let me just check in here. I know Sam Aikman is here and Brooks is here. How about Eleanor or Madison? Oh, okay. Oh, good. So we have 4 gold key writing winners who are going to be Madison. So first is going to be Samantha Aikman, a senior at Mount Mansfield Union High School in Jericho, reading her poem. This is the 5th year in a row, and it's the final year that Samantha has won gold key and read her work. So thank you for doing this again, Sam.
Last Saturday, I made a carrot cake in a green glass pan with a chip on the side. We are never really all here. We walk through days with our heads in some deserted cabin once discovered on the rocky shore of Maine, or in the gutter beside a street lamp in a city we once longed for. What I mean to say is, we are pieces. What I mean is, we don't always have to know what we want. The year I turned 15, I was determined to buy a Greyhound ticket and travel south. It didn't matter how far I got or how long it took, only that I was moving towards the light and the open horizon. I never packed a bag. I never bought the trip. I'm still sitting here with a paper bag of broken glass and an unfinished poem on a Thursday night that was never meant to come.
Thank you, Sam. Now I'd like to invite out Paul Brooks Balkin, a junior at South Burlington High School, to read his poem, Their Pump Jack. Brooks.
Frothing water churned in the burbling nooks of streams. Spindly trees twisted through the sky to our sunlight. We watched them come. We watched, sitting in the gentle fingers of the trees. Crawling fields of our mothers molted, shedding their skins and becoming slithering deserts. Our shimmering trees closed their fingers into fists, withered and burned. Frothing black liquid pounds up from the nooks of the depths of our earth, spitting into our sunlight. The eternal up-down of the pump jack forever hammers the war drum reverberating from our heart, driving its spear into the chest of our home.
Thank you, Brooks. Next is Eleanor Kinney, a senior at Essex High School, reading her short story, Strangers Eclipsed.
The other ones were really short. Mine is not short. Okay. In a small, nameless town off the coast of Maine, a crotchety old man sat bundled in wool and flannel on a decaying park bench. The weather that day was particularly foul, the kind that chased out the sleepy morning fog with voracious winds, clouds swollen fat and jolly with a brooding rain. If you squinted hard enough at the upward gloom, you could eventually make out the sun, a frigid, wary eye doling out a meager ration of light. This town was a ragged patch on the greater quilt of rural America, a village of pinch-faced fishermen and graying seamstresses and blind veterans who jumped at the banging shutters during the night. The only thing that ever mildly riled the townspeople was when the occasional teenager would be caught throwing glass bottles at passing freight trains or setting abandoned bait shacks on fire, in which, inevitably, the volunteer sheriff would be called to the scene by some frenzied widow. He'd swagger into town, all polished boot and paunch, and give the kid a good shake-up, even cuff him if he was feeling exceptionally cheeky. It was always a good show, and then everyone would resume their normal activities. Within a week, the event would be a discarded newspaper fragment rolling in the breeze. The man on the bench went by Birdie, and everybody who knew his real name was long dead. Old Man Birdie, he was known by most residents, batshit Birdie by the children who knowingly avoided his front lawn. He liked to sit out in the town square on Sundays, a little before Mass let out, to watch people. Not in a sentimental, cherish thy neighbor way, but because Birdie loved to judge others. He found a wicked glee in being a scathing yet unassuming critic. That fellow over there with the stained blazer, the couple arguing animatedly at the red light, a stooped woman on the corner prattling on about nothing in particular to nobody in particular. The world was his for scrutiny, and he had a merry old time with it. Birdie had plenty of dislikes, most of which were strangely specific and farcical. Yappy dogs with bulging eyes, the way children's mouths were always stained with some unidentifiable jelly, onion soup, but the thing he despised most were people who lacked purpose. It was an old distaste battered into him by Birdie's own father, who had had the habit of sizing up random strangers, a meek waiter or something, and remarking on their pedestrian spirit, often brashly and within the victim's earshot. "No gales in those sails," his father would bellow. And so old man Birdie would watch, much like a seafarer surveying the blackened horizon from a dingy lighthouse. On more frigid days, he'd appear with a ratty knit hat or a mug of steaming coffee in his hands, but most of the time he was unadorned, arms folded shrewdly, scruff of facial hair twitching every so often. His scorn had come to be predictable in response to the familiarity of passionless residents. But today was different, because she showed up. At first, he couldn't believe the clash of color strolling up the sidewalk toward him. The girl was draped in the utmost haphazard array of clothing. Patched corduroys that dragged at her heels, a button-up fluttering over a threadbare tee, oversized silver jewelry pulling on her earlobes, and a moth-eaten emerald scarf slung around her neck. To top it all off, her hair was fire hydrant red, artificially so. It was as though some terrible graffiti pop art had shimmied off its cinder block wall and sprung to life. Birdie felt his jaw fall slightly agape. How she had managed to match not a single thing, he didn't know. He was bewildered. In his stupor, the old man barely registered that the girl was walking closer now, and good God, she was plopping herself down on the far end of the bench, airy as a leaf and ornate with mottled hues. Not paying him a single mind, the girl pulled a battered book from some unseen pocket and began to read. The old man was still staring. A minute or so passed, and she grew visibly unnerved. Her eyes slid over to him, low beneath heavy lids. Chewing on her thumbnail, she finally turned to him exasperately and said, "What?" "You are wearing a funny outfit," Bertie said stiffly. A quizzical, incredulous sort of expression spread on her face. She didn't seem to know what to say. A moment's silence passed, then she looked him in the eye. "What's your name?" Bertie hesitated for a second, then told her. The girl's eyebrows arched amusedly. "You have a funny name." "It's not my real name, I'll have you know," scoffed Bertie, irritated. "Fine," she said affably. "You are wearing a funny name." The old man harumphed. He eyeballed the cover of her book, which was now leaning on her thumb, the rest of her hand still wedged between chapters. "Anne of Green Gables," he noted. "I didn't care for that one much." "You didn't like it? It's a children's classic, widely adored. It's pretty harmless," she said, miffed. "I found the young lady to be quite bothersome." "The young lady as in Anne?" She rolled her eyes, not discreetly whatsoever. "I think she's, spunky. And I've just moved to a new place, same as her, so we've got a bit of common ground." "You're new? Oh, well, welcome and all that," Bertie replied. "There are some children playing hopscotch the street over if you want to join them, or whatever it is people your age enjoy doing these days." "You think that place does tattoos?" the girl asked, clipping the end of his sentence brusquely. She strained her neck in the direction of a dumpy, velvety-looking parlor a few buildings down. "That one, with the cat in the window." Bertie's eyes stretched wide with horror. "Tattoos? For God's sake, how old are you, 14? An angry redness crept up under his collar, a rashy turtleneck. "You look like a damn circus performer. Now this? Come on." The old man sputtered, forehead vein comically tall, hands flailing aimlessly. The girl let out a riotous, spellbinding laugh, clear as a church bell. It petered out into a tinkling little giggle, and she swiped moisture from her eyes. "I'm sorry, really. I just knew it would send you up in arms, although I don't appreciate the jab at my appearance." Her dimples were loose around a square-toothed grin. "You nearly popped a blood vessel," she continued heartily, almost to herself. Bertie only sank down further in his spine, a little embarrassed, muttering some stern comment the girl didn't bother to pick up on. "So, tell me, is there anything to do at all around here?" she asked him, once her fits of laughter had subsided. Bertie thought for a moment, rubbing at his still inflamed neck. "If you keep walking in that direction, you'll find the pier and a little strip of beach. It's too cold to get in the water, but there's an old woman that lives in a houseboat who might brew you a cup of Earl Grey," he said. "And if she likes you, a muffin to go with." "That sounds quite lovely, actually," the girl responded, her voice genuine and warm like embers in a hearth. "I'll tell her you sent me." The old man waved his hand dismissively. "Well, I'd better go. Got lots of tattoo appointments and other obscenities lined up for today." She stood and smoothed her wrinkled shirt, then returned her dog-eared paperback to an obscured fold of fabric. "I'm off." Flashing a wry grin and saluting theatrically, she started up the road. Oddly, Bertie found himself wanting to prolong her visit, or maybe he just wanted to get the last word. "It was nice talking to you," he said, while looking at the ground, trying to sound disinterested. "You as well," the girl called over her shoulder, her flaming hair tossing gently. Bertie studied her as she sauntered away. Her hands were sunken into her front pockets, earrings jingling with each footfall like some kitschy wind chime. She was receding from his view now, her stride bouncy and almost dancer-esque, stepping to a melody no one else could hear. But most intriguingly, the girl's head was just slightly pitched backwards, chin jutted forward, taking in everything around her with all the wonder in the world. It was as though a bottled sense of mystique had come uncorked within her, the contents floating to form a quivering film beneath her skin, verging even the grim slate of sky with a twinkling admiration. Birdie realized with a curious pang that he had never asked for her name. Peppered throughout his subconscious were nearly a dozen things about the girl that Old Man Birdie found disdainful, and yet, with the musical lilt of her voice still hanging in the air, he couldn't help but feel charmed. Birdie leaned back against the wooden slats of the bench and let out a low, gravelly chuckle. And then, almost miraculously, the faintest sketch of dappled sunlight appeared by his hand like a resting dragonfly. Momentarily, warmth spread on the crowns of his knuckles. Then, as swiftly as it had arrived, it was gone. In a small, nameless town off the coast of Maine, a hardened old man and a young girl blown in by some otherworldly storm have just met. To their west lies a sprawl of cities that the old man will never set foot in, and people he'll never lay eyes on, but that she just might. And to their east, only the marbled waves washing up the shore. High above the crumbling brick buildings, beyond the low din of far-off train whistles, the girl is still distinguishable. A luminous haze trails her as if she carries handfuls of fine golden sand wherever she goes. She is a glittering pinprick amidst the heavy bog of damp air and soot, a star fallen to earth.
Thank you, Eleanor. It's wonderful. Our final reader this morning is Madison Wilson, a senior at St. Johnsbury Academy, who will read a personal essay entitled Bottomless Coffee.
Mine is also not very short. When I was little, one of my favorite things to do was have sleepovers at my grandparents' house. They lived just up the hill from us, and our lawn extended to meet theirs, so when the sun began to set and the grass felt cooler, I would grab my bags and start the walk up to their house. I had a lot of energy, but my legs were small, so by the time I reached my destination, I would always be panting and find myself flopped down on the couch the second I got in. As the night drowned the vibrancy of their yellow house, the rooms would become flooded with the sound of jeopardy and the smell of cooked chicken tenders. After supper, we would go to our positions, stationed, waiting for the silence of sleep to arrive. My grandfather sat in his brown recliner, easily the comfiest seat in the house. I sat on the floor, imagining grand races with my plastic cars or teaching my felt ponies to do backflips. The sound of the TV was a background to the vivid world inside my mind, one whose wheels seemed to never stop turning. Finally, my grandmother would lay on a long couch. After a while, when her knees carried the full ache of time, my grandfather would put blocks of wood under the couch's legs so that she could stand up easier. I remember sitting on the couch the next morning and noticing that my feet couldn't touch the floor. The best part about sleeping over at my grandparents' house, however, wasn't the endless lemon popsicles or the bottomless pit of Oreo cookies. No, it was the mornings. I would wake up with the sun in the room next to theirs, the white shades cutting the bright yellow rays into pieces, and race to their room. Sometimes, I was early enough that both my grandparents were still in bed, and I would lay myself between them, safely tucked away from the outside world by the arms of two people who loved me more than what seemed possible. Too soon, my grandfather would get up to start making coffee. In those silent moments, only disturbed by the gentle patting of his feet in the kitchen, my grandmother would wrap me in her arms and tell me stories. It seemed like she always detailed was of my mom. My grandma used to own a few horses and a barn, and in the earliest of mornings, she would wake up and go do the chores, bringing my mom along with her. Her voice circled my mind with images of them strolling down corridors freshly lit with morning light, feeding the horses, taking them out individually to brush them and give them treats. She told me once that when my mom was 2 or 3, my grandma had been brushing the head of a horse, or maybe feeding her an apple, when she noticed that my mom had walked underneath the belly of the horse and was sitting there, her legs enveloped in hay. My grandmother told me how scared she was that my mom would be kicked, and how she had to carefully coax my mom out from under the horse, trying not to spook either of them. She would never take her eye off of my mom in the barn after that. Her stories were all small and simple like this, but they were stories of her life, and I could have listened to them for hours. In those little pockets of time, it seemed there was no place where she ended and I began. We were both just a collection of stories told over and over again to listening ears. It wasn't long until my grandfather would come in, a warm cloth in hand. Wiping the night's quiet from our faces, the warmth of the washcloth felt like a physical manifestation of his love. It was my favorite part of the morning. He would then walk back to the kitchen, retreating beyond what, for those few seconds, were the sole four walls of my life. 10 or so minutes later, spent cocooned in the infinite warmth of their white blankets, my grandpa would bring us a cup of coffee, always warm and always perfectly made. He would get back into bed, and we would all sit there, sipping our coffee and just talking to one another, making jokes and laughing at them. I think if I could time travel, I would go back to one of those moments first. If my grandparents had looked close enough, they probably could have seen my heart actually glowing. Time slowed when I was between them, the sweetness of the sugared coffee coating and melting in my mouth. Time slowed, and everything was perfectly okay. Yet, time never completely stops, so we would eventually all get restless, our stomachs grumbling and the caffeine freshly coursing through our blood, and we knew it would be time for breakfast. Once again, my grandpa would perform a selfless act of kindness and step into the biting cold of the morning to start the car for us while my grandma and I got dressed. We went to the Moose Look every morning, and I played the same song, Act Naturally, every car ride, and I ordered the same thing for breakfast, hot chocolate, bacon, and pancakes, every morning. It was our routine. My grandfather would play little pranks on me while we ate, like flicking a ball of paper in my direction. I would laugh and try to do the same back. My shots were never as good as his. It was our routine. My grandfather wore these paperboy type hats. Every morning, every day, without fail, he wore one. One year for his birthday, I got him a charcoal gray one, and he wore it a lot. But at that restaurant, with the slight chatter of the many regulars and my stomach full with chocolate and bacon, I would take his hat, and I would wear it. I admired my grandparents, and this hat seemed to be a part of my grandfather, an extension of him. So, naturally, if I wanted to be more like him, I had to wear it too. They bought me a pink paperboy hat for my birthday one year, but it wasn't the same, and I never wore it much. It wasn't him. The car ride back to the restaurant would be a modified version of the one there. I would stare out the window, singing that joyful-sounding song, and the only difference was that now my stomach was full, and I was headed home. I don't remember the last time I spent the night at my grandparents' house. I don't remember many particular conversations we had during those warm winter nights, but I know that every night felt the same, and it was always, always full of love. When my grandmother passed in 2016, their double bed was taken to the cellar. My grandfather started sleeping in a twin bed, now next to the cards everyone wrote him. Their house was never the same after that. It was the same color, yet it looked less vibrant. The popsicles seemed to taste different. The puzzles weren't as much fun. But her voice was still in the recording machine. I called it sometimes when I knew no one was home, just to hear her. And her robe was still hung on the back of the bathroom door. Her lipstick was still in the cabinet behind the sink. Pieces of her scattered everywhere. It turns out she never really left. But above everything, I have those nights and mornings and long summer days with her, tucked safely in the back of my mind. Thousands of conversations that fell into my ears like a melody, stored in my mind forever, right alongside my memory of her. She lives on in me, in my siblings, in my mom, in my grandpa. He lives on for her. Those nights at my grandparents' house seemed as safe and as content as my mind could ever become. They're part of my core being, of who I am. A part of me has stayed in those memories, tucked between the arms of some of the people I love more than anything, listening to stories and feeling the warmth of the fresh coffee. A child who didn't know anything and didn't need to know anything. A little girl with big dreams and small legs. She'll be there forever, living on with them, listening to stories about horses, letting her sleep be washed away with a gentle hand, and dreading the last sip of her coffee. Thank you.
Thank you, Madison. Okay. Before I recognize all the award winners, I just want to take a moment to thank this year's judges, volunteer judges, who gave such thoughtful consideration to the many hundreds of works that were submitted this year. They are Catherine Arden, Megan Buchanan, Jackson Ellis, Alex Hyam, Veranda Porsche, Tamara Smith, and Sarah Ward for writing, Vanessa Compton, Joe Derry, and David Eichelberger for art, not including photography, and then John Gittleson, Joan O'Byrne, and Vaughn Trachtman for photography. Thank you all so much. I also want to thank the museum staff and volunteers who did a stellar job, as usual, organizing this year's Scholastic Art and Writing Awards for us and for all of you. In particular, Kirsten Martzi and Sarah Freeman. Thank you so much. Now, what we're going to do, rather than have every single award winner come up on stage, which we did do once years ago, we're going to do this in groups instead. So the first group I'd like to acknowledge are actually not students at all. Well, maybe they are, but for these purposes, they're the phenomenal educators whose students have won awards. So if you are one such educator, I would ask you to please stand up now and be recognized. We're so grateful. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. We are all so thankful for the important work you do and the dedication with which you do it. And oh my God, under these circumstances that you've had to do your work in the last year or two. So thank you so much. Now I would like to ask all the students who won an honorable mention, so even if you also got some other awards, if you got an honorable mention, please stand up as a group and be recognized. Thank you and congratulations. Now, if you were the recipient of a Silver Key Award, please stand up and accept our congratulations. It's up and down for some of you. Now, what I'm going to do now is read off the individual names of this year's Gold Key winners. So if you're here and you hear your name, please come up when I read your name and just gather here on the marble steps looking out at the audience so we can see all of you here. And I usually ask at this point, the rest of us, hold your applause until all the Gold Key winners have come up, but that hardly ever works. So you just feel free to clap whenever you'd like. Okay, so I'm going to read through about 30 names of Gold Key winners, and please come up if you're here and you hear your name. Cormac Abbey, Brody Adams, Samantha Aikman, Cameron Allenbear, Ella Ambrogio, Isabel Armand, Brooks Balkan, Annika Beth, Madeline Bozatarnik, Jaiki Elfin Sai, Olivia Calderon, Matthew Califano, Samantha Crafts, Megan Frost Clark, Django Grace, Isabel Greenewalt, Wablu Tu, Cassidy J, Eleanor Kinney, Elias Leventhal, Zoe Maxwell, Nancy McNichols, Nicholas McQuilling, Patient Mwibaleka, Alana Nguyen Kenny, Sylvie Normando, Emma Paris, Milo Piovano, Hannah Sardinas, Maria Sell, Willa Sheehan, Layla Tomlinson, and Madison Wilson. Congratulations to all of you Gold Key winners and those of you who are maybe watching on Zoom or will watch the recording. Congratulations and thank you. You're all so wonderful. You can have a seat again now if you'd like. That about wraps it up for our ceremony. Thank you again for coming. We understand that the National Scholastic Awards, so some of the regional submissions were passed along for national consideration, and we understand that the National Scholastic Awards will be announced on the Scholastic website within a week or two, so check there, and we'll be checking as well, and we'll be sharing that information when we see it. Winners, if you haven't picked up your awards packet, I believe we have awards packets, correct? No, we don't have awards packets. We have pins. Pins? We have pins. If you haven't picked up your pins, please do so in the center gallery, correct? And also, please take your artwork home with you and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.